Thank you for listening to this conversation with Jason Alcott about his book, The Sowing Principles, the steps between your purpose and the harvest. Here's what it says about the book. In his debut book, The Sowing Principle, Jason Alcott shares that God has already equipped you with everything that you need to grow in your relationship with him. The book is a framework for looking at all that God has blessed you with and all that he is calling you to, and how you can discern if you are moving towards or away from his will for your life. Experience in these pages an increased self awareness while you discover the tools of sowing that lead to a truly purposeful life. Pick up the book. There's a link in the description to that off of Amazon. Be sure and check it out. Welcome to the Growth Talk Podcast, where we discuss business growth strategies, personal development, and leadership from a Christian worldview. Thank you so much for listening. As always, today I am excited to bring you a conversation that I had with Jason Alcott. He is the author of The Sowing Principle, the steps between your purpose and the harvest. This is a great conversation, and it's really based around the sowing and reaping principle. And it's something that I think a lot of us neglect. So I think you're going to have a lot of value inside of this episode. So I hope you enjoy it. I will not delay. Let's get right into the interview. Hey, Jason, thank you so much for coming in and just talking to me about your book, The Sowing Principle. I really appreciate it, man. I totally enjoyed the book. It's an awesome book.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I've been listening to your podcast, been enjoying what you're putting out there, and I think we're kind of very much on the same page in some of our thoughts and just about the future and where things are headed. And I'm excited to be here. I'm disappointed I couldn't fly all the way to Kentucky, but this will have to do, right? So
yeah, hey, I appreciate that. But yeah, I would have been loved to see you in person. That would have been great. But
how cool would that be?
a little bit of cross country flight would be required for this. And technology has brought us into an arena where we can do this relatively easily through good old technology like Zoom and StreamYard and stuff. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's cool.
So, Jason, before we kind of get into the book itself, if you don't mind, let's talk about kind of your early life, growing up, siblings, wife, things just about you, and ultimately kind of what life was like for you before you wrote the book, and kind of give us an idea about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm 41 now, and I live just outside of Vancouver, Canada. I've been married for 6.5 years, coming up on 7 years, actually pretty quick. And I've got 3 little girls. I got a 5-year-old, I got a 3-year-old, and I got a 4-month-old baby girl. So I am busy in that part of life, and it's awesome. It's fun. It's a blessing. My wife takes the most of that because I still get the opportunity to go to work every day, and she's but the girls are just the biggest blessing, right? It's full on, right?
Yes.
When they're that age. So, but a lot of fun, and I didn't even realize how much fun it would be to kind of be a dad, and to be a dad of 3 girls. I mean, yeah. So watch out, here comes the world, right? So, but I grew up in this area in close to Vancouver, and my parents were kind of born and raised in the area as well. So I kind of roots here on the West Coast. And I grew up in a Christian home. My parents became Christians when I was younger, and so that was kind of a Christian home. But they were learning as Christians, right? They were new Christians, new to the faith, as they sort of grew up. And so we grew up together. We were part of Christian schools. I've got 2 younger sisters, one who's 2.5 years younger than I am, and one who's 14 years younger than I am. She's actually adopted from China.
Awesome.
So she's awesome. She just recently got married about a year ago, and so kind of grew up in that setting. But that sort of, and so, kind of had that in the background. There's various points in my life where my faith became more of my own in different degrees. There was definitely a phase through like high school and kind of wrapping that area up, where I went to a Bible school in Sweden for a year. And that was obviously impactful in my life, and sort of, again, my faith becoming more of my own. Then it sort of, I would say, tapered off. It was still very mechanical for me. And it wasn't until I was sort of, I talk about in the book, one of the key stories in the book is, I wrote this, I was wanting to get married at one point, I was kind of looking for that in life. It was kind of at that point. And I was looking to meet somebody, and I was working in the restaurant industry, and I was doing a whole bunch of different things. I was pretty busy. There was a lot going on, but there was definitely a lot of my life that wasn't lining up with some of my core values or Christian values as they should be. And I wrote this list of, the features and kind of the things that I was looking for, characteristics I was looking for in a future wife. Um, and it was a really big moment for me looking back on that, because I wrote that list, and what happened is that God really spoke very clearly to me in my heart. He says, this is a great list. You got things on there like you want a woman of integrity and somebody that seeks after God's heart, and somebody that wants to live on fire for God in the way that she wants to raise her kids. And he's like, that's a great list. That sounds like an amazing woman, but the man that you are today is not going to attract this woman. Like, the sort of double-minded life that I was living at the time,
Yes.
Christian on Sundays, maybe Sunday mornings for a couple of hours was kind of where I was at.
Yeah.
And, Bible collecting dust on the nightstand, you pick it up and there's a square there, right? It's like, shoot. I think there's a lot of us that have experienced that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
What came out of that was really interesting for me. What came out of that was that I started to look at, okay, so if I'm not the man that I'm supposed to be to potentially marry this type of woman, so what is that man? Who is that man then? And what does he do on like a daily basis? How can I move in that general direction to become more of that man? And one of the things that I picked up in doing that was I thought, a man that would be like this, a man of integrity, a man seeking after God's heart, would probably read his Bible every day.
Yeah.
And so I just picked that up and started really simple, not like I read the Bible in a year or anything like that. I started out, reading a proverb a day, and, expanded beyond that, gave myself a lot of grace for days that were missed. And what came out of that, it was very mechanical to start, but what came out of that was a relationship with Jesus Christ. Like he actually speaking into my life on a daily basis. And that has been this incredible blessing. And of course, I then met my wife, who's still she's so incredible, so out of my league in so many ways, and was everything on the list and beyond, and everything that God kind of had planned for me, which is incredible. But the relationship that I developed with Christ through that was the biggest thing that's kind of transformed my life to where it is more today.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think your story and you mentioned that it does kind of resonate with a lot of people, I think. And it should. It especially does with me. I very similar. Grew up in a Christian home, was taught Christian beliefs, but it's just like you had said. It's I was doing it because they did it, and at some point I had to come to that point where it was my own. Like I believed it because I found it to be true. And I think that's a key in this journey that we're all on. Totally. Is that relationship aspect. Yep, it's a mechanical one at first. You're going through you could almost say ritual when it comes to reading the Bible, those type of things. But at some point, it begins to resonate inside of you as true. You begin to get the relationship, and that ultimately puts you in a path that leads you to Christ. And I think that's well put. And I like how you described the searching for the wife and writing on a list. That's so true.
I know there's lots of people that are like, oh, you shouldn't do that kind of stuff. I'm like, I don't know. When I did it, however many years ago, like I've still got the note in my phone because that's where I wrote it down. Right. I don't know. That's where I was at. That's what I've been kind of taught was, get things in front of you, get goals in front of you. But God speaking to my heart was the part that kind of threw me off. I didn't expect that part, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and it's just kind of funny that we write down everything that we want in our lives, and using the wife as an example, or any like a dream or whatever.
Totally.
But we focus on this external, perspective about what we want, whereas we don't self-reflect on ourselves to say, wow, okay, well, to actually get those things, there's probably some things in my life that I've got to deal with and get in order to be able to get to that point, like to get the wife full of integrity and faith. And
yes,
and you got to work on ourselves, right? That's where it starts. We got to meet Christ where he's at and what he wants us to do, and meet him there. So I like that. And I think that's ultimately probably how correct me if I'm wrong, your journey led you into this book, The Sowing Principle. Because it does kind of lay out that kind of scenario. It talks about basically how we, reap what we sow, but you go into a little bit more detail in that whole concept. I mean, it's a great passage in scripture, but I think it does resonate across many channels of our lives. And I think you did an excellent job laying that out in your book. But before we kind of get into the meat of that, why don't you share a little bit, just a quick kind of overview concept about what the book was written about, and kind of who it was for, and those type of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sowing principle, I'd wanted to write a book for a long time, which I think apparently a lot of people want to write a book.
Yeah.
I heard a stat the other day, 81% of people would like to write a book one day. So I want to sit here and just say that if that's you, I want you to know you can do it, because if I did it, you absolutely can do it.
There you
Um,
go.
and,
It's good.
and, and I wrote it using the principles that I wrote about in the book. That was the only way that thing came together, was little tiny bits at a time. Right. So, but it's yeah, so the sowing principle, I wanted to write it. It's really a framework for looking at everything that God has blessed you with. When you think about, your time, the ability to control your thoughts, your words, your actions, the gifts and skills and talents that God's given you, how do you look at those things and then apply them in your life in such a way that they're moving you towards God's purpose in your life. And that's, I wanted to create a framework around that be able to have the language and the conversation around what are we doing with the gifts that we've been given, and how are they sowing towards
Mm.
God's kingdom. And so I grew up reading a lot of books, leadership books, personal development books, and there's a couple of great books. One of them is called The Slight Edge by a gentleman by the name of Jeff Olson, and another one's called The Compound Effect by a gentleman by the name of Darren Hardy. They talk about very much similar things, and it's a lot of what's in the sowing principle as well. And it's really diving into the little tiny steps that we take on a daily basis and how that can shift the trajectory of our life over a long period of time.
Mm.
And
That's good.
so often people are looking for, and our culture is really big on this, it's 30-day abs, it's a juice cleanse, and you're fixed in 2 weeks, right? Like, we're looking
Yes.
and told to look for a very quick fix, silver bullets, get rich quick, whatever it is, whatever you want to talk
Hmm.
about. And so I loved this concept of, these little tiny steps growing and changing the trajectory of my life. And I recognized that as much as those books that I mentioned were talking about financial and, career success, that this was impacting every area of my life, and in a big way impacting my faith and my relationship with Christ, and in a big way affecting my marriage and my relationship and my ability to be a father, and my health, and everything is encompassed in this. What am I doing in the tiny bits of, with the gifts that God's given me? How am I sowing sort of each day, each and every moment? And not that I've got it all figured out by any stretch, but just that I'm continuing and being willing to learn on the journey.
Yeah. And
And
that's
so
and that's
that's
exactly what it is. It's a journey.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I think realizing that we are flawed and we have to work on ourselves. And it's not against the self-help category of books. I think they do help us to begin to dissect ourselves a little bit. But I think you're right. I think there's that self gratification, that instant gratification that we have in our culture,
Mm-hmm.
that we just don't realize that to make drastic changes in our lives, to really truly work on ourselves, it is these small micro changes we've got to make over a long period of time before we start seeing those results. And then that's where we become the better person, the person that Christ really ultimately wants us to be. It's not a quick change, and it's never a journey that comes to an end. It is a journey that we're constantly on. And I think being aware of that is key. We're never going to arrive, but we've got to continue to work on those things. And I think you did a good job laying that out. I think you really did. You simplified the concept in a way that broke it down into each kind of category of your life. And I'll have to agree. Like I didn't do the sowing principle as my life, but I did standards for my life.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and as I was reading your book, I was like, well, it's funny you say sowing, which is the biblical and really what it is. And
Sure.
I had standards, but that's exactly what I was doing through those standards. These were my non-compromising standards that I had for my life. And each one of them were forms of sowing. Like I had a standard for how much exercise I did, what I ate, standards I did in my relationships, people I connected with. These are things that I set up. But man, when I was reading your book, I was like, this correlates so well with that I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I was doing, but I didn't attach that sowing principle to it. So it actually took what I would call my standards for living into a true map that would say, like, look, if I continue to sow into these standards, then this is the results I'm going to get. And I think your book just did a great job kind of bringing that together. So like goal setting, all those type of things, it all comes back to this sowing principle. Like if you set a goal, you got to sow to get to that goal, right?
Yeah, I love that idea of talking about it from standards. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, and goal setting I think about a lot because I grew up in a very goal centric home. We were very much encouraged to get goals and write them down. But you're dead on the point there in you've got a standard, you've got a goal. Have you been able to walk that back to what does that mean that you get to do today?
Yeah.
And I think that can be for some people that can be a bit daunting, but for me, I find that incredibly freeing, because if I want to change my life, it's, sometimes it's sold to us as you've got to make massive changes or massive shifts. And then you
Yes.
think, because you think, you want to become a healthier person. And you think, well, gosh, now I got to stop all of these things. Like, well, what about starting one thing that's positive on a consistent basis, as compared to just making this wholesale change that you are now terrified of, so you don't even take the step?
Yes.
or
Absolutely
you start and you
agree.
quit, because I joke a lot about the Bible in a year plans. I talk about those a lot, and I think it's
Yes.
great. Like, I encourage people, like, if that's what you want to do, go for it. But in my
Yes.
mind, personally, if I sign up for a Bible in a year and I do really great for the first week and the second week, and then the third week I miss a day, and the fourth week I
Uh-huh.
miss 3 days, and then by the time I get to the middle of February, I'm like 15 days behind. What happens for myself in those situations is I just quit altogether, and I'm like, well, maybe
Yeah.
I'll start again next January. And I'm like, well, that's not helpful, because the goal isn't to read my Bible in a year. The goal is to
Yeah.
be in my Bible on a daily basis, right? And have that,
That's good.
allow Christ to speak into my life, allow the trajectory of my life to change. So if I miss a day, that doesn't, like, I'm not writing off the next, 10 months because I missed, a couple of days and I feel like I can't catch up, right? So
Yeah,
I
that's
really try and focus on that.
absolutely true. We set these goals, that New Year's resolutions. I'm not a big
Exactly.
fan of them. I
Yeah.
just I don't think it's a good idea. I think just being aware of your own shortcomings and realizing that those are the things that you need to be working on and changing
Mhm.
over time is how you're going to see results. And I do think if everyone just stopped and took a look at themselves, they would realize that they need to make, some significant changes. And those changes are not going to be something that just happens instantly. It
Yeah.
goes back to the sowing principle. Just like gardening, if you want a plant to come out,
Yeah.
you can't just expect, I'm going to plant a seed, tomorrow I've got corn, right?
Yeah.
It just does not work that way. And it's no different. And if you read the Bible itself, you realize the struggle that the authors were writing about these people, right? I mean, you read about David in the Bible and you see what he was. Yeah, he was a God chosen man, but look at the struggles he went through to become who he needed to be.
Yeah.
You
Look
know,
at the life that he went through to become that man.
that's right.
Yeah.
There was a lot of refining fire.
We're not very good at self-reflection.
We are
At
just
least
not good at
generally, because I
self-reflection.
think, and not that that we can't, it's just that we generally don't pause long enough to, like you said, exactly what you said. If you're willing to pause long enough to take a look, it's not always pleasant. So I think that's probably why we don't do it.
Yeah, people don't want to do that. They don't
Yeah.
want to see those things. But yeah, well, let's get a little bit into the meat of the book now. Let's
Sure.
transition into
Yeah.
that. So, I'm going to read. You start off with a statement in the very beginning of the book. I'm just going to read this and then have you kind of talk about it. But
Sure.
it started off with this. It said, "The sowing principle is simply this: what we experience in life today and tomorrow is directly related to what we sowed yesterday and each day before it." Just expand on that. I know we've kind of been expanding on that, but that's a statement you start off with. I think it just sets the tone for the entire book.
Yeah, I think, so I'm 41, and there's definitely been points in my life where I've woken up, and I would imagine this would be true for a lot of people, a lot of listeners, that you wake up and some days and you wake up and you go, how did I get here? Right? Like, how did I end up, in this particular situation? Maybe maybe it's financial, or maybe it's health or family, or and it's often when we're a gap between where we are and where we think we should be.
Mm.
And we there's two options there. You get either the opportunity to take responsibility, which is what I'm trying to talk about in the book, for the decisions that I've made that have led me to this point, or you blame, and we blame the circumstances around us. You blame the government,
Yeah.
the weather,
The blame
whatever it
game.
is, right? Blame
Mm-hmm.
game. And it's a circle. And so, yeah, that's really what I've realized in my life, and had to wake up and just be honest. I mean, obviously there are things in life that we don't, like if you have a horrible health diagnosis, I mean, there's things that I wouldn't wish on anyone, right? Or something happens. There are things that are outside of our control, but having a good understanding and grasp of what's within your control, and how those decisions that you've made have led you to where you are in this moment, taking more of an emphasis towards taking responsibility, I think, is always going to serve us better, in my personal opinion.
Man,
So
that's
what I wanted to kind of start out the book with, is just like, hey, here's, if you're sitting in a pile of whatever, let's own it.
yes.
And then let's take the book and let's do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that even going back to the blame game,
Hmm.
we will justify our circumstances based on those external circumstances, right? It's like so and so caused me to do this, or this happened, therefore I couldn't do this, instead of looking internally. And in your book, you talk about the blame game, and really it sets up some major roadblocks for someone to actually grasp the concept of the sowing principle,
Hmm.
because you're making excuses for everything else around you. If someone was to watch the news and learn everything about the government, they spend their whole time talking about how bad everything is, instead of focusing in on the things that they actually have control over. They're never going to get past those roadblocks. There's something that's always going to get in their way because there's something else has caused this problem. The economy's crashing. We're talking about the housing market. It's in a major shift. So there'll be a bunch of excuses of why we can't buy homes, or why I can't sell my house. But it'll never be that maybe the house is overpriced or these type of things, right?
Totally.
It's going to be that something else caused that.
Yeah.
So before we move on to, let's talk about the blame game a little bit. Why is understanding that blame game important to understanding the sowing principle, and how does that type of game limit us overall in fulfilling what God has basically called us to do with our lives? Like how does that, what's the consequences of the blame game?
Well, the consequences of the blame game is that you give away your ability to take responsibility. Like you give that to someone else. When you blame the market, or you blame, whatever's going on around you for what's happening in your life, you're giving away the chance for you to do something about it. That's the big one. The other thing,
Mm,
though, is that, I talk a lot about, when what are you sowing on a daily basis? Well, you're sowing your thoughts, which turn into your words and your actions and your emotions. So you get the opportunity to control your thoughts. You can't think about two things at the same time. I talk about that in the book. And if you're
mm-hmm.
blaming something, then you're thinking about something. You're sowing your energy and attention and focus into something that's outside of your control, and you're planting weeds basically in the garden of your mind and in your body. And then we turn around and we go, how come I'm not getting any results, or why is nothing positive happening in my life? I'm like, well, you just spent the last 3 months complaining about the current president. I don't,
Yeah.
I get it,
Yeah.
but we're all kind of going through it. And those are the kind of the big ones where, like, you're sowing that back into your life when you're blaming the circumstances and things like that are around you.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you cloud your vision, you cloud your judgment.
Yep.
You don't allow wisdom and logic and reason to enter in, because you're
Hmm.
using all these external circumstances to define why things are the way they are. All self-limiting. Those are not. You're right. They're not sowing the right seeds.
Totally.
So just everyone's listening. Don't play the blame game, right? Take control, take ownership of your life, take ownership of that.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
the blame game is a tricky thing because it becomes a habit with people too. Like, I know people
That's
in my
good.
life that's a part of, kind of sort of like, it's a part of their persona because they've been doing it for so long. And it's not necessarily going to be easy, but what I recommend, and I've seen it recommended, and I've done this as well. Like, when I wake up in the mornings and I'm feeling anxiety, my go-to is I move my thoughts over to gratitude. And if you find yourself blaming a situation, switch your thoughts. Just start to get that trigger. Oh, I'm blaming something. I need to start to think about things that I'm grateful for. Because when you can just start to make those tiny shifts in your thought process, it's going to shift, kind of more of who you are. You're going to be more open-minded to the opportunities. We're going to see more of God's blessings that are in your life, as compared to pushing and blaming what's outside of you. It's easy to say and to talk about on a podcast. It is challenging to do,
Yeah.
but it
Yes.
can be done. And I
Yes.
think that's what people need to recognize, is that, yeah, you can do, you just because you've been blaming everything for, that's how you grew up, because that's how your
Yeah.
family was. You can change. It is possible.
Yep. It absolutely is.
Yep.
All right. Let's break down the sowing principle. In the book, you talk about 4 pillars. Pillar 1, what you sow. Pillar 2, how you sow. 3
Mhm.
is where you sow, and then 4 is why you sow. Uh, would you mind kind of just give us a synopsis of each one of those? So starting with what you sow and why that
Yeah.
matters, and how, and those categories.
Yeah, for sure. So what you sow is starting the conversation to recognize, what do you have that you're sowing. So the big one, kind of at the core of it, if you think of it, you're sowing your time every single day. And so inside what you do with your time, you have your thoughts, you have your words, your actions. And then I talk about your gifts, skills, and talents and abilities. Like, I believe that God's given us all gifts and skills and talents. to be able to make an impact that he wants to do in and through us. And so how are you stewarding those gifts? How are you stewarding the time that you're given, your thoughts, your words, your actions? That's what I want to be able to have language around that and be able to have you identify how that fits in, what that is as a part of your life. What are those things? What are the seeds that you have to work with? That's what that sort of part of the chapter is about.
That's good.
And then how you sow is getting into more talking about habits and rituals um, and recognizing the power of some of those things and how you can use them to your advantage. Like you can take things like we talked about personal growth. Like I do a weekly YouTube video right now where I love to grab concepts that are out of the personal growth world and talk about them in relationship with my faith and more holistically in my life. And for me personally, that includes very much my faith, every part of my life. So when I'm learning about personal growth, it isn't always just about my growth in my career, my finances, or something like that. To me, it's how does this affect my marriage? How can I use this and have it affect my faith? And I think there's a lot we can learn and combine in those two spheres, spiritual growth and personal growth. And I try and bring those things together. And so when I talk about how, that's really kind of what I'm trying to get in there, is start to think about how do you make this happen? How can you habit stack so that you can I read my Bible every day when I eat breakfast. And what's really funny is if I have a morning where I wake up late and I skip breakfast, you know what I don't do? I don't read my Bible. And I'm like, shoot, that's not, but I eat breakfast 90%, 99% of the time. Right. So for me, that works. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what can you take some of these tools that we know exist, like habit stacking? I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but can you take something like that we know that exists? It's a very real thing. And can you apply that in your life such that you can further your relationship with Christ, that you can strengthen your marriage, that you can become a better father or, better mother, whatever it is, right? Can you do that? And I believe that we can. And so I wanted to kind of lay that out very intentionally in the book.
Yeah. I think that's it. You're actually kind of resonating with me a lot because Growth Talk is very much about that. It's about the growth of the person.
Mm-hmm.
But we're, again, my faith is very center to the mission of this. Kind of exactly what you said. It's like taking these concepts that you would say are self-help, which is fine, but bringing them back into that holistic part of my belief and my Christian faith and matching it and aligning it with the Word of God. Yeah. And when the habit forming techniques and the journaling techniques and the goal setting techniques, when they correlate with God's promises and what God says about us, then you you can take this self-help category and bring it into your belief and get a very solid thing that can really help just all aspects of your life.
Yeah, I think it can really kind of open up a lot of just more opportunities for you to grow. And so, yeah, something like your podcast here with Growth Talk, which I just love. That's, I listen to great podcasts when I drive to and from work because I want to sow into my mind great ideas. I want to be inspired. I want to be learning and growing. And I think that there's a large, subset of the population that's what they do. They want to grow. They want to develop. They want to beyond that. They want to make an impact. We want to make an impact.
We want to make an impact.
We want to make an impact. The opportunity for us to make an impact is with the people that we're actually already in relationship with. Most of the time, when you talk, well, it can move on to where, but where do you sow? Sometimes I think we need to, we think that we need in order for me to make an impact, I need to have 1.1 million followers on, choose your social channel. But if you think about your own life, and I could ask you this, Adam, think about your own life and the people that have impacted you the most. For myself personally, it's been people that have kind of known me. Obviously there have been books, there have been podcasts, there have been things that I've learned that have had significant impact on my life, but there have been people that have spoken into my life at very specific points that have changed the trajectory of my life, but they knew me and they knew me well enough to do it. And so when we talk about where do you sow, I think we can be intentional with where are we sowing our time? Where are we sowing our energies into, and just being conscious of that, we can take responsibility for, if we don't prioritize our life, someone else will. And that's really what I want to get across in that section of the book is take the opportunity, take the responsibility to prioritize your life of where are you going to sow this time.
Yeah, that's good. One of my favorite words is intentional. I just love that word.
Good word.
Because it's in our lives, if we don't take every category, and we emphasize so much about finances and exercise and work hours and all this kind of stuff, that we neglect the one asset we actually have is time.
Yep.
And if we are intentionally delegating those times to doing the things that you said here, like where we're sowing, and you tie those things into your everyday routine that then develops habits and rituals, and that's where you're going to start seeing results. And I know we keep kind of harping on this, but this quick instant gratification stuff is just a complete lie. There is no instant gratification. These things take hard work. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm sitting here and I've got it all figured out. I don't. And Jason, I think you would agree. We don't have this all figured out.
No.
I mean, but to talk about it and expose it and to dissect this is the whole point, because when we become aware of this, then we can be intentional with actually delegating our time and putting it into a system that actually begins to change our lives, and then ultimately affecting those around us. And then truly leading down the road of building better relationships, which is going back to what you were just saying. Who has affected our lives the most? Well, it absolutely is the people that know who we are. But going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, it's like we have to be aware that we are flawed individuals in need of improvement.
Oh man,
and
in need of a savior.
And in need of a savior.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it all ties in beautifully, and it's one of the best stories that we could ever preach on is the gospel, and all of this points right back to what Christ did and what he's continuing to do and what he wants us to do. This life is not our own, right? We're stewards of everything that we have, and every second we breathe, we're stewards of that time. And I think your sowing principle brings that right into the forefront of people's lives.
Just trying to bring it front of mind, and keep it in front. We keep bringing up this instant gratification thing, and I love talking about that because it helps me to keep me reminded that I'm in this for the long game. What are the goals here? It's not the car, it's not the house. There's so much more.
Yes.
Right. And you get home and you play with your kids, and that really helps. But great podcasts, great inputs in my life help to keep that frame of reference as well, because as soon as you turn around, somebody's trying to tell you, well, doesn't that car look great? And wouldn't you look great in it? Right. And I'm a car guy. I love cars. I enjoy driving nice cars. It's fun. Right. But it doesn't, That's not who I am as a person. It doesn't define me, and it doesn't make me the man that I am. But it is challenging because so much is told that this is what it looks like to be successful. This is what it looks like to be, what we think in it. That's not what God talks about. It's not what he's calling us to. It's not what he's looking to. So when I talk about the last pillar there, the why, when we go through ups and downs of life, we all get to do that. That's part of it. Life happens to everybody. I like to say life happens. That's my, I don't have that bumper sticker, but it should be on my car, right?
We all should have that one.
We all should have it. Like, and everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about. I love that saying as well.
Yeah.
Life happens. So when you're going to go through the ups and downs of life that will invariably come, and we will go through that, we need to be able to be connected back to the why are we sowing? Because just because life gets tough doesn't mean that you stop digging into your Bible on a daily basis, or that you stop some of those positive things that you've started to sow on a daily basis, or the growth of your gifts, skills, talents, and abilities. If God's given you the gift to be able to go and to connect with people, or to be able to go speak with people, or maybe he's given you the gift to write. Well, because things got challenging doesn't mean you should stop in the development and growth of that gift. You got to dig in, but you got to know why you're doing it. Otherwise, you're going to hit a bump and you're going to want to quit.
Yeah. The why. Yes.
Right? Yeah. Come
why
back to
we
why.
sow.
So
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, just to kind of close this out a little bit, what would you like to say to those that are serious about going on this, this journey of basic self-reflection, breaking down some of our old beliefs and the blame game and the sowing principle? Like, where would you kind of like people to kind of go from here on this journey? What would be some advice you would give them? Anybody's wanting to kind of go down this road?
Yeah, I mean, if you're just getting started in a personal growth journey and wanting to take steps in that direction, I would just keep it as the simplest. What's the simplest thing that you could start doing today or tomorrow? and be able to continue to do on a consistent basis. What's the simplest thing? Could you read for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day? Could you grab a copy of the Sowing Principle and bring that home? And could you read that for 5 minutes a day over the next, if you do it that rate, now you just read it, so you know how long it takes to read it, but it's only a couple of hour read. It's not a super long book, right?
No,
but could you read, you read 5 to 10 minutes of a great book every day? Okay. So I'm not a reader. Okay, great. No problem. Could you listen to a podcast on your drive to work could you just listen to it on the way to work and then maybe listen to music on your way home?
There you go.
I love music. Great. I love music too. Great. I listen to podcasts on the way into work. And then if I'm feeling like I want to listen to music on the way home, I listen to the music on the way home. What's something that is a simple step that you take that, when you wake up 5-10 years down the road, your life is going to look significantly different because you decided to sow into some growth and learning in your own life. That would be my encouragement to those that are there. There's so many. We live in a world where there's so much information available to us. I talk about that in the book. Like there's no lack of information. Like that's not it. Like, if it was a lack of information that was, the reason between where you are and where you'd like to be, that's just not going to fly. That's not the case.
Yeah.
Right.
It's application, right?
Applications. Are you going to be able to pick up that, whatever it is that you want to grow in, and actually do it with a consistency that's going to have an effect on your life over the next 5 years? You're looking for a quick fix. This is too often the problem. I want to change my life by this weekend. And so I go to the conference, and I love conferences, but I go to the conference because I believe that's going to change my life over these next 3 days. You may learn what you need to learn in a conference over a 3-day period of time. And I think that's great. But the only way your life is going to change is what you apply coming out of it. Right.
Yeah. Ooh, you nailed it, man. Yeah. Information overload, but application is missing. Totally. And that's the thing. We need to slow down and begin to apply the things that we are learning. When we have something that really resonates with us, we're like, oh, you know what? I need to work on this. Yeah. We need to stop and actually begin to do that and work on applying that. I'm guilty of that, right? I mean, 100%. I read a lot of books. I read all of the time, but application is still a daily struggle. It's like, how do I apply this in? And I think even going back to your book, I think that's why it's just such a great read, man. Because what you end up realizing is after you read that, you're actually already applying the concept. What you have to do then is realize where you are sowing and begin to adjust that into the area that you need to be sowing in. Yeah. So it's like the application for your book is actually very doable because we wake up every day and we're sowing somewhere. We're sowing the relationships with our spouse, our kids. Yeah. Like we're already doing this. Yeah. It's just kind of refocusing that and aligning it with where God wants us to be focused on and sowing where God wants us to go within our gifts, like you said. And, so I think that's just the beauty of this. When we start talking about application, your book can be applied. So people
you're already sowing.
You're already sowing. You're already doing it.
It comes down to your word of intentionality. Now let's just do it with intention.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's right.
Intentionality. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yep. So just to wrap this up, what are you currently working on?
So another book is kind of framework, definitely would love to write another book. It's on the list. I came away from just before the book launch. I started doing these weekly YouTube videos, which I mentioned. I've really been pouring myself into that recently. I love that. I love the consistency of it. I love how much it forces me to clarify my ideas and to be able to share them with people. And so I do that weekly. You can Google Jason Alcott or head over to jasonalcott.com. To kind of check that out. And those are just relatively short, 10 minutes or whatever like that, a week that you can kind of get uplifted and encouraged and hopefully give you some tools to be able to continue on your personal growth journey. So that's what I'm kind of working on now, and I love it. So it's a blast. So.
Well, that's awesome. Jason, thank you so much. Everyone, you can pick up his book on Amazon. I'll have a link to that in the description and the show notes for you guys to do so. I will also have links to get in contact with Jason, his website, and everything in the show notes as well. So be sure to reach out to him and connect with him. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. He's got some great content in there. You can see that he has got a lot of wisdom. This book was great. Highly recommend you guys check it out and read it for yourself. And like we said, you can begin to apply it very easily to your life, and you'll start seeing results over time. It does require some work. Jason, thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Growth Talk. If you have a question or comment you would like to share, please email them to askadamtoday@gmail.com. If you enjoyed listening, please consider subscribing to this podcast, Growth Talk. And also be sure to rate us everywhere you listen to your podcast. It does help the show out. In the meantime, remember to be bold, keep learning, and be relentless in your pursuit of truth.